waitress would never run a restaurant. The words sliced through the air of the Lincoln Park bistro like shards of broken glass, leaving Clara Martinez frozen behind the mahogany bar counter. Her coffee-stained apron seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds as Victor Langston's cold gray eyes bore into her soul with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. I don't know where you're listening from. Maybe you're serving tables, polishing glasses, or waiting for someone to say thank you. It doesn't matter what time it is, but I promise, today's story will shake your heart. The autumn rain painted Chicago's windows in streaks of silver, each droplet catching the amber glow of street lamps that had just flickered to life along Michigan Avenue. Inside, Bistro Lumiere. The scent of roasted garlic and fresh thyme mingled with the soft hum of evening conversations, creating a symphony Clara had come to know better than her own heartbeat. For 3 years, she had moved through these dining rooms like a ghost who had learned to dance, invisible yet essential, silent yet deeply aware of every patron's unspoken needs. Clara's worn leather shoes whispered against the polished hardwood floors as she balanced a tray of steaming bowls, her movements so fluid they seemed choreographed by years of practice. The weight of ceramic and silverware had long since become an extension of her arms, just as the rhythm of service had become the soundtrack to her existence. Her dark hair, pulled back in a simple bun, caught the warm light from the vintage Edison bulbs hanging above each table, like tiny suns suspended in amber glass. At 38, Clara carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned that true strength often wore the mask of humility. Her hands, weathered by countless hours of washing dishes and wiping tables, moved with the precision of a pianist playing a familiar sonata. She could read the room's temperature as easily as a thermometer, sensing when Table 7 needed more bread before they even realized it themselves, knowing that the elderly couple by the window would want their check split before they asked, understanding that the young mother with the crying infant needed patience more than efficiency. The bistro itself was a testament to old Chicago elegance. Mahogany panels gleamed under crystal chandeliers, while burgundy leather banquettes held the secrets of 1,000 whispered conversations. Oil paintings of the city's skyline during the 1920s adorned the walls, their golden frames catching the light like memories preserved in time. The bar, where Clara often polished glasses during quiet moments, was carved from a single piece of oak that had supposedly witnessed the construction of the Willis Tower through the restaurant's tall windows. But beneath the restaurant's polished surface lay the truth Clara knew all too well. This world of white tablecloths and wine lists printed on heavy paper was not truly hers. She was the help, the invisible hand that kept the machine running smoothly while others claimed credit for its success. Her paycheck, a modest sum that barely covered her studio apartment in Uptown and her mother's medication costs, reminded her daily of her place in Chicago's rigid social hierarchy. Every evening, Clara would catch fragments of conversations about real estate investments on the Gold Coast, stock portfolios that had weathered market storms, and vacation homes in the Hamptons that cost more than she would earn in a decade. The patrons spoke of millions as casually as she spoke of grocery lists, their comfortable certainty about money creating an invisible barrier she had never learned to cross. Yet, Clara possessed something that couldn't be measured in dollars or cryptocurrency portfolios, an intuitive understanding of what transformed a meal into a memory. She watched the way couples leaned closer when the lights dimmed just so, how the aroma of her grandmother's secret spice blend could soften even the hardest business negotiations, how a perfectly timed smile could turn a stranger's difficult day into something bearable. Her dream, carefully guarded like a fragile seed in winter soil, was to create her own place, somewhere that honored both elegance and authenticity, where the South Side flavors of her childhood could dance with the sophistication of fine dining. She envisioned mismatched vintage chairs around reclaimed wood tables, walls decorated with photographs of Chicago's neighborhoods, and a menu that told stories instead of simply listing ingredients. Clara had grown up in Pilsen, where her mother Rosa worked 3 jobs to keep their small apartment above a corner grocery store. The scent of masa harina and cumin had been her childhood lullabies, while the sound of her mother's tired footsteps on creaky floorboards marked the passage of time. Rosa had cleaned office buildings downtown during the early morning hours, worked at a factory during the day, and took in sewing at night. Also, Clara could attend community college and dream of something bigger than survival. The irony wasn't lost on Clara that she now served the very people who had never noticed her mother's invisible labor in their corporate towers. She understood that her current position was simultaneously a step up and a reminder of how far she still had to climb. Each night, as she counted her tips by the light of her kitchen table, she calculated not just rent and groceries, but the slowly growing fund that might someday finance her own dream. The restaurant's owner, a distant corporation with headquarters in New York, treated Bistro Lumiere like a line item on a quarterly report. The managers came and went with seasonal regularity, each bringing new rules and leaving behind fresh disappointments. Clara had outlasted 7 different supervisors, her consistency becoming the restaurant's only reliable constant. She knew every regular customer's preferences by heart. Mr. Chen always ordered the salmon, but asked for the sauce on the side. Mrs. Patterson needed her water glass refilled exactly 3 times during her meal, and the young couple who came in every Friday evening were saving money for their wedding, but still splurged on the chocolate soufflé they shared with 2 spoons. These small intimacies, invisible to management but precious to Clara, had become the foundation of her expertise in hospitality. As closing time approached each night, Clara would stand in the empty dining room and imagine it filled with her own vision. The laughter of families sharing her grandmother's tamale recipe, the satisfied silence of couples savoring dishes that honored both tradition and innovation, the warm buzz of a community gathering around tables that welcomed everyone regardless of their net worth or social standing. But dreams, Clara had learned, required more than passion and hard work. They demanded capital, connections, and the kind of confidence that came from never having been told you didn't belong. As she hung up her apron each night and walked through Chicago's glittering streets toward the bus stop, she carried the weight of knowing that tomorrow would bring another day of serving other people's dreams, while her own remained carefully folded and stored away like her best dress, beautiful, cherished, but rarely given the chance to see the light. The city's skyline stretched above her like a constellation of possibilities, each illuminated window representing someone's success story. Clara pulled her coat tighter against the autumn wind and wondered how many of those lights belonged to people who had started with nothing but determination and ended with everything they had ever wanted. She couldn't know that her own transformation was already beginning, set in motion by forces she had yet to encounter. The next morning arrived with the kind of November crispness that made Chicago feel electric with possibility. Clara's day began, as it always did, with the 5:30 a.m. bus ride from her neighborhood, a thermos of coffee she couldn't afford to buy at work, and the familiar weight of anticipation mixed with resignation in her chest. The city was still waking up around her, streetlights flickering off as the first pale rays of sunlight painted the downtown skyscrapers in shades of gold and pink. Bistro Lumiere felt different that morning, though Clara couldn't immediately identify why. Perhaps it was the way the autumn light slanted through the tall windows, casting longer shadows across the dining room floor, or maybe it was the unusual quiet that seemed to hum with unspoken tension. The typical sounds of morning preparation, the clatter of silverware being sorted, the soft whoosh of tablecloths being smoothed, the gentle bubble of coffee machines warming up, all seemed muted, as if the restaurant itself was holding its breath. Marcus, the sous chef who had become Clara's closest friend among the staff, greeted her with an expression that mixed excitement with concern. His dark eyes held the kind of nervous energy that preceded either celebration or catastrophe, and Clara had worked in enough restaurants to recognize the difference. "There's news," he said simply, his voice carrying the weight of change. corporates finally decided what to do with this place. The staff meeting that followed would later mark the beginning of everything that came after. Janet Morrison, the latest in a long line of temporary managers, stood before the assembled team with the uncomfortable posture of someone delivering news she didn't fully understand herself. Her perfectly pressed suit and clipboard seemed almost comic against the backdrop of the restaurant's lived-in warmth, like a business school textbook trying to explain the poetry of hospitality. "Effective immediately," Janet announced, her voice carrying the hollow authority of someone reading from a corporate script. "Bistro Lumiere has been acquired by Langston Restaurant Group. The new owner will be conducting a comprehensive evaluation of operations over the next month to determine the restaurant's future direction." Clara felt her stomach tighten with the familiar anxiety that accompanied change in the service industry. She had witnessed too many evaluations that ended with half the staff dismissed and the remaining workers expected to maintain the same standards with fewer resources. The restaurant business was littered with the dreams of people who had poured their hearts into places that ultimately became nothing more than real estate investments for people who had never learned the difference between feeding profit margins and feeding souls. "Who's the new owner?" asked Maria, one of the veteran waitresses whose steady presence had anchored the front-of-house team for nearly a decade. "Victor Langston," Janet replied, and even Clara, who rarely followed the business news, recognized the name. Langston Restaurant Group had built an empire across the Midwest, transforming struggling establishments into profitable ventures with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Their reputation preceded them, increased revenue, streamlined operations, and a corporate culture that prioritized metrics over the intangible qualities that made dining memorable. Victor Langston himself was a legend in Chicago's restaurant scene, though not always for reasons that inspired admiration. His rise from a single failed diner in Cicero to a multi-million-dollar portfolio of upscale establishments read like a business school case study in determination and shrewd investment. His personal net worth was estimated in the hundreds of millions, with diversified assets that included not just restaurants, but real estate developments, cryptocurrency holdings, and a venture capital fund that specialized in hospitality startups. But success, Clara had observed, sometimes came at the cost of remembering why the work mattered in the first place. The stories about Langston's management style painted a picture of someone who understood profit margins better than people, who could read a balance sheet with the precision of a scholar, but had forgotten how to recognize the human stories that played out around every dining room table. The first time Clara saw Victor Langston in person, he was standing near the host station with the bearing of someone accustomed to ownership. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 45, with a kind of understated elegance that came from custom-tailored suits, and a lifetime of knowing that money could solve most problems. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled, his Italian leather shoes polished to mirror brightness, and his watch, a Patek Philippe that probably cost more than Clara earned in 2 years, caught the restaurant's ambient lighting like a small signal fire broadcasting his success. But it was his eyes that Clara noticed most. Sharp, analytical, constantly calculating. They moved across the restaurant's interior with the efficiency of someone conducting an inventory, cataloging assets and identifying inefficiencies with the detached precision of a forensic accountant. When his gaze finally settled on Clara, she felt suddenly transparent, as if he could read her financial history in her posture and determine her net worth from the way she held her order pad. "You're Clara Martinez," he said, and she was surprised that he knew her name. His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never needed to ask permission for anything. Smooth and controlled like aged whiskey served neat. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, her voice steadier than she felt. Years of service had taught her to maintain composure, even when facing the kind of scrutiny that felt like standing under a magnifying glass in direct sunlight. "I understand you've been here longer than most of the current management team," Victor continued, his tone suggesting that longevity in staff was either a remarkable achievement or a concerning symptom of larger institutional problems. 3 years in March, Clara confirmed, uncertain whether this was a conversation about job security or performance evaluation. Victor nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. I'll be spending considerable time here over the next few weeks, observing operations and identifying opportunities for improvement. I expect everyone to maintain their usual standards while I conduct my assessment. What Clara couldn't know was that Victor Langston's acquisition of Bistro Lumiere represented more than just another business transaction. His restaurant empire, while successful by every financial metric, had recently faced criticism from food critics and industry peers who argued that his establishments had become soulless profit centers that had forgotten the art of genuine hospitality. A scathing review in Chicago Magazine had particularly stung, describing his flagship downtown location as a beautiful corpse, technically perfect, but devoid of the warmth that transforms eating into dining. The review had haunted Victor more than he cared to admit. Despite his portfolio's impressive returns and his diversified investments that included everything from blue-chip stocks to Bitcoin futures, he found himself questioning whether success could be measured solely in quarterly earnings and year-over-year growth percentages. Bistro Lumiere represented an experiment, an attempt to rediscover what he might have lost in his pursuit of scalable excellence. But experiments required variables to manipulate, and Victor had already identified his first subject for observation. Clara Martinez, with her obvious competence and quiet authority among the staff, represented everything he believed was both admirable and ultimately limiting about career service workers. She was skilled within her narrow scope, reliable within her defined parameters, and completely lacking in the broader vision necessary to transform potential into sustainable profit. Or so he assumed. What Victor Langston didn't understand was that Clara had been conducting her own experiment for 3 years, learning every aspect of the restaurant's operation not from textbooks or business seminars, but from the ground up. She knew which vendor delivered the freshest produce because she had tested their quality during slow afternoons. She understood the rhythm of Chicago's dining patterns because she had observed the ebb and flow of customers through every season. She had memorized the preferences of regulars, not through data analysis, but through the kind of patient attention that transformed strangers into a chosen family. The collision between Victor's analytical approach and Clara's intuitive expertise was inevitable. What neither of them anticipated was how much each had to learn from the other, or how painful that education would prove to be before it became transformational. As Victor concluded his initial survey of the restaurant and disappeared into the manager's office with his leather portfolio and gold-plated fountain pen, Clara returned to her section and began the familiar ritual of setting tables for the evening service. But something had shifted in the restaurant's atmosphere, like the moment before a thunderstorm when the air becomes charged with possibilities both thrilling and dangerous. She smoothed linen tablecloths with particular care that evening, arranged silverware with extra precision, and found herself unconsciously elevating every small detail of her service. Whether this was motivated by professional pride or self-preservation, Clara couldn't say. But she understood, in the way that experienced servers develop an intuition for changing dynamics, that everything familiar was about to become complicated. The dinner service that followed would prove to be a preview of the challenges ahead. Victor remained in the restaurant throughout the evening, sometimes visible at the bar where he nursed a glass of bourbon and observed the dining room with the intensity of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, other times disappearing into corners where he could watch the kitchen's organized chaos or the intricate dance of the waitstaff without being noticed. Clara found herself hyper-aware of his presence, second-guessing decisions that had become automatic over years of experience. When Table 12 asked for substitutions to accommodate a food allergy, she found herself wondering if Victor was noting the special accommodations as inefficiency. When she took extra time to console the young mother whose toddler had knocked over a water glass, she worried whether her compassion would be categorized as time management failure in whatever mental spreadsheet Victor was compiling. By the end of the evening, Clara's usual satisfaction with a successful service felt complicated by the uncertainty of being evaluated according to criteria she didn't understand. As she completed her closing duties and prepared to catch the last bus home, she realized that Victor Langston's presence had transformed her workplace from a familiar stage where she knew every line and cue into a theater where someone had changed the script without warning the actors. The city lights blurred past the bus window during her ride home, each passing neighborhood a reminder of the distance between her world and Victor's. While she worried about monthly rent and her mother's prescription costs, he likely spent more on a single business lunch than Clara earned in a week, while she saved tips in an old coffee can toward dreams that might never materialize. He commanded capital flows that could reshape entire industries. But Clara possessed something that couldn't be acquired through venture capital or cryptocurrency investments. She understood that hospitality was fundamentally about recognizing the humanity in every person who walked through the door. She knew that the true currency of service wasn't measured in dollars or profit margins, but in the accumulation of moments when one person's care made another person's day slightly more bearable. As she climbed the stairs to her modest apartment, Clara carried with her the weight of uncertainty, but also the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your work matters, even when others fail to recognize its value. She couldn't predict what Victor Langston's evaluation would conclude, but she was certain of one thing: whatever changes lay ahead, she would meet them with the same dignity and grace that had sustained her through every challenge her life had presented. The autumn night air held the promise of winter, and Clara pulled her coat closer as she turned her key in the lock, unaware that the real test of her character was still to come. The transformation began slowly, like frost forming on windows, barely noticeable at first, then impossible to ignore. Within a week of Victor's arrival, Bistro Lumiere started showing signs of the systematic evaluation he conducted with the precision of a forensic audit. Every procedure was questioned, every cost scrutinized, every inefficiency identified and cataloged in the leather-bound notebook he carried like a weapon of analytical destruction. Clara watched the changes unfold with the growing unease of someone witnessing their home being slowly dismantled by strangers. The first casualties were small but symbolic. The complimentary bread service that had welcomed guests for years was deemed unnecessary expense and eliminated. The fresh flower arrangements that had added warmth to each table were replaced with cheaper silk alternatives that looked perfect but lacked the subtle fragrance of life. The handwritten daily specials board, where Marcus had showcased seasonal ingredients with the creativity of an artist, was replaced with printed inserts that could be standardized across Victor's restaurant portfolio. "It's about consistency," Victor explained during one of his daily briefings with the management team, his voice carrying the certainty of someone who had successfully replicated the same formula across dozens of establishments. "Customers need to know what to expect from the Langston brand, regardless of location." But Clara understood something Victor's metrics couldn't measure, that consistency without soul was simply uniformity, and uniformity was the enemy of the personalized care that transformed dining from consumption into connection. She watched regular customers' faces register confusion and disappointment as familiar touches disappeared, replaced by corporate efficiency that felt as warm as a balance sheet. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who had dined alone every Thursday evening for 2 years, seemed particularly lost without her usual table by the window, where Clara would discreetly ensure her water glass never emptied and her evening felt less solitary. The young couple, saving for their wedding, looked bewildered when their traditional Friday night chocolate soufflé was removed from the menu in favor of more cost-effective dessert options with higher profit margins. Marcus grew increasingly frustrated as his creative input was systematically reduced to following standardized recipes developed by corporate consultants who had never worked a dinner rush or understood the alchemy of adapting ingredients to reflect the season's offerings. "They want me to be a robot," he confided to Clara during a rare quiet moment. Everything measured to the gram, time to the second, profitable to the penny. Clara found herself walking a dangerous line between maintaining her professional standards and adapting to Victor's evolving expectations. Her natural ability to anticipate customer needs, developed through years of careful observation and genuine care, was being reframed as deviation from protocol. Her tendency to spend extra time with guests who needed assistance was categorized as inefficiency that damaged table turnover rates. The breaking point arrived on a particularly busy Friday evening when the restaurant was fully booked and operating at the peak of dinner service complexity. Clara was managing her section with the fluid expertise that had made her invaluable to previous management teams, seamlessly juggling multiple tables while maintaining the personal touch that kept customers returning. She had just finished explaining the evening's wine pairings to Table 6 when she noticed the commotion at Table 9. Mr. Davidson, a regular customer who brought important business clients to the restaurant monthly, was growing visibly agitated with Rebecca, one of the newer servers who was still learning the intricacies of fine dining service. The order had been delayed due to kitchen complications, and Rebecca was struggling to manage both the explanation and Mr. Davidson's increasing impatience in front of his guests. Clara could see the situation escalating toward the kind of public scene that damaged not just the server's confidence, but the restaurant's reputation. Without hesitation, she smoothly intervened, approaching the table with the calm authority that comes from years of experience in diffusing difficult situations. "Good evening, Mr. Davidson," she said with the warm professionalism that had always characterized her service. "I understand there's been a delay with your order, and I sincerely apologize for any inconvenience." What followed was a masterclass in hospitality recovery. Clara acknowledged the problem without making excuses, provided a realistic timeline for resolution, offered complimentary appetizers to bridge the wait, and somehow managed to transform Mr. Davidson's frustration into appreciation for the restaurant's commitment to making things right. Within 10 minutes, the table was laughing. Rebecca had regained her composure, and what could have been a disaster became an example of excellent crisis management. But Victor Langston saw something entirely different. From his observation point at the bar, he watched Clara leave her assigned section to manage a situation that wasn't technically her responsibility, spend valuable time on extended customer interaction that exceeded standard protocols, and authorize complimentary items without prior management approval. In his analytical framework, Clara's intervention represented multiple violations of the efficiency standards he was implementing. The confrontation came at the end of the evening, after the last customer had departed and the staff was completing their closing procedures. Victor approached Clara with the measured stride of someone prepared to deliver feedback that was as much lesson as correction. "I observed your handling of Table 9 this evening," he began, his tone carrying the neutral authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Yes, sir," Clara replied, uncertain whether she was about to be commended or criticized. "While I appreciate your intention to assist, your actions violated several operational protocols we're implementing. You abandoned your assigned section, exceeded your authorization level for comps, and spent excessive time on a single table during peak service hours." Clara felt her chest tighten with the familiar sensation of being misunderstood by people who measured success in ways that ignored its human cost. "Mr. Davidson is one of our most valuable regular customers," she said quietly. "He brings corporate groups here monthly, and his satisfaction directly impacts our reputation and revenue." "That may be true," Victor replied, "but individual exceptions undermine systematic improvements. We can't build scalable excellence if every server decides independently when to deviate from established procedures." The conversation that followed revealed the fundamental disconnect between Victor's corporate vision and Clara's service philosophy. He spoke of customer satisfaction scores and profit margin optimization, while she tried to explain the intangible value of relationships and trust that couldn't be quantified in quarterly reports. He referenced successful implementations across his restaurant portfolio, while she described the unique character and community connections that made Bistro Lumière special. "You're skilled within your current role," Victor concluded. "But you need to understand that running a successful restaurant requires thinking beyond individual customer interactions. It's about systems, consistency, and sustainable profitability." Clara nodded politely, but behind her professional composure, she felt something crystallizing into resolve. She understood that Victor saw her as a competent but limited employee who needed to learn her place within his larger vision. What he failed to recognize was that Clara had been studying restaurant operations from every angle for 3 years, not from textbooks or corporate seminars, but through the kind of ground-level immersion that reveals truths invisible from executive offices. That night, as Clara rode the bus through Chicago's glittering downtown corridor, she made a silent promise to herself. If Victor Langston was determined to transform Bistro Lumière according to his vision of scalable excellence, she would prove that true hospitality couldn't be reduced to protocols and profit margins. She would demonstrate that the soul of service came not from corporate consistency, but from the irreplaceable human connection between people who cared and people who needed to be cared for. She couldn't know that her quiet rebellion was about to collide with Victor's determination to modernize the restaurant according to his proven methods. The battle lines were being drawn not just between competing philosophies of service, but between two fundamentally different ways of understanding what it meant to feed people's hunger, both physical and emotional. As the bus carried her toward home through the November night, Clara gazed at her reflection in the dark window and saw not just a waitress preparing for another day of service, but a woman preparing to defend everything she believed about the work that had become her calling. The real test of her convictions was about to begin. The morning that would change everything arrived wrapped in the kind of Chicago winter cold that made the city feel crystalline and fragile. Clara's breath formed clouds of vapor as she walked from the bus stop toward Bistro Lumière, her worn coat wrapped tightly against wind that cut through the downtown corridors like sharpened steel. The restaurant's windows glowed warmly against the gray dawn, promising sanctuary from the harsh poetry of winter in the Midwest. Inside, the familiar rhythms of morning preparation felt different under Victor's continuing scrutiny. He had established a routine of arriving early to observe the staff's opening procedures, his presence transforming routine tasks into performances under invisible evaluation. Clara found herself hyper-conscious of every movement as she completed her setup, folding napkins with geometric precision, arranging silverware with mathematical exactness, preparing her section as if it were a stage set for a play whose reviews could determine her professional survival. The morning briefing that day carried an unusual tension, like the moment before thunder when atmospheric pressure makes the air itself feel heavy. Janet Morrison, still serving as interim manager while Victor completed his assessment, announced that representatives from the corporate office would be joining them for lunch service, important people whose opinions would influence the restaurant's future direction. "This is an opportunity to showcase the improvements we've implemented," Janet explained, her clipboard clutched like a shield against uncertainty. "Mr. Langston has specifically requested that we demonstrate our enhanced efficiency standards and streamlined service protocols." Clara understood the subtext immediately. Today's lunch service wasn't about serving customers. It was about performing competence for executives who would judge the restaurant's value based on metrics that had nothing to do with the quality of human care that had always been Clara's specialty. The hours leading up to lunch passed with agonizing deliberation. Every small imperfection became magnified under the weight of expectation. A water glass with spots, a tablecloth with barely visible wrinkles, a server's uniform that wasn't perfectly pressed. The kitchen buzzed with nervous energy as Marcus and his team prepared to execute Victor's standardized menu with the precision of a military operation. When the corporate delegation arrived, Clara recognized the type immediately. Successful people accustomed to being catered to, whose comfort with authority came from years of making decisions that affected others' livelihoods without requiring them to understand the human consequences. They moved through the restaurant with the casual ownership of people for whom expensive lunches were business deductions rather than special occasions. Victor had arranged for his guests to occupy the prime table in Clara's section, a strategic decision that would allow him to observe her service while demonstrating the improvements he had implemented. As Clara approached their table with the controlled grace that had characterized her work for 3 years, she felt the weight of multiple evaluations focusing on her performance. The lunch began smoothly enough. Clara executed her service with flawless technical precision, following Victor's preferred protocols while maintaining the warmth that made dining feel personal rather than transactional. She took their orders with efficient professionalism, coordinated with the kitchen to ensure perfect timing, and managed the complex choreography of serving multiple courses without apparent effort. But then, the unexpected happened, the kind of crisis that reveals the difference between competent service and exceptional hospitality. One of the corporate executives, a stern woman with silver hair and expensive jewelry, began showing signs of severe allergic reaction to something in her appetizer. Her breathing became labored, her face flushed, and she grew increasingly distressed as the symptoms intensified. Clara recognized the emergency immediately. Years of experience had taught her to read the signs of medical crisis, and her instincts kicked in with the speed of someone who understood that customer care sometimes meant literally caring for customers' well-being. She quickly removed the offending dish, brought water, and calmly asked the specific questions that would help identify the allergen, while discreetly signaling the kitchen to stop preparation of similar dishes for other guests. But the woman's condition continued to worsen. Clara realized they were dealing with anaphylaxis, a potentially life-threatening allergic reaction that required immediate medical intervention. Without hesitation, she called 911 while simultaneously coordinating with her colleagues to clear space for emergency responders and ensure the other guests remained calm and cared for during the crisis. The next 20 minutes passed in controlled chaos. Paramedics arrived quickly, providing the necessary treatment, while Clara assisted by providing detailed information about the ingredients and timing of the woman's meal. Her quick thinking and comprehensive knowledge of the restaurant's procedures proved invaluable in helping medical professionals understand what had triggered the reaction. Throughout the emergency, Clara managed not only the medical crisis, but the complex task of maintaining service for other guests while ensuring that the corporate delegation felt supported rather than abandoned. She arranged for their meal to be comped, coordinated alternative transportation for the affected executive, and somehow managed to restore calm professionalism to what could have been a devastating public relations disaster. By the time the ambulance departed and the restaurant had returned to normal operations, Clara felt the exhaustion that comes from successfully navigating genuine emergency. She had used every skill acquired through years of hospitality work: medical awareness, crisis management, customer relations, team coordination, to transform potential catastrophe into evidence of the restaurant's commitment to guest welfare. But Victor Langston saw the situation through entirely different criteria. From his perspective, Clara had deviated from established protocols, created disruption during a crucial evaluation, and exceeded her authorization in multiple ways. The comped meals, the interrupted service, the attention drawn to operational challenges all represented failures of the systematic approach he was implementing. The confrontation came later that afternoon, after the corporate guests had departed and the regular lunch crowd had been served. Victor asked Clara to join him in the manager's office, his expression carrying the weight of decisions already made. "I want to discuss this afternoon's incident," he began, his voice maintaining the controlled tone of someone delivering prepared feedback. Clara felt her stomach tighten with apprehension, though she remained professionally composed. "I hope Mrs. Richmond is feeling better," she said, referring to the executive who had experienced the allergic reaction. "She's fine. Thank you to the quick response of the medical team," Victor replied. "But I need to address several concerns about your handling of the situation." What followed was a conversation that revealed the fundamental incompatibility between Victor's systematic approach and Clara's intuitive service philosophy. He criticized her for deviating from standard procedures during the crisis, for making unauthorized decisions about comps and service adjustments, and for creating what he termed unnecessary drama during an important evaluation. "I understand your intention was positive," Victor concluded, "but emergency situations require adherence to established protocols, not individual improvisation. We can't have servers making independent decisions that affect operational consistency and cost control." Clara listened with growing incredulity. "Mr. Langston, are you suggesting I should have followed a corporate manual while a customer was having a medical emergency?" "I'm saying that proper protocols exist for these situations, and deviation from those protocols creates liability and inefficiency, regardless of outcome." The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, but Clara understood that she was being criticized not for poor performance, but for excellent performance that didn't conform to Victor's preferred methodology. In his world, even life-saving intervention could be wrong if it wasn't systematized and pre-approved. As Clara left the office that afternoon, she carried with her the crushing weight of being fundamentally misunderstood by someone whose opinion could determine her professional future. She had spent 3 years developing expertise that went far beyond taking orders and carrying trays, but Victor saw only an employee who needed to learn proper boundaries and procedures. The bus ride home that evening felt like a journey through a city that no longer belonged to her. Chicago's familiar skyline seemed distant and hostile, its glittering windows representing success that was measured in ways she would never understand or achieve. The contrast between her modest salary and Victor's considerable wealth had never felt more pronounced than in that moment when her competence had been interpreted as insubordination. But Clara Martinez possessed something that couldn't be diminished by criticism or evaluation, the quiet certainty that comes from knowing your work matters even when others fail to recognize its value. As she climbed the stairs to her apartment that night, she carried with her not defeat, but the growing conviction that some battles were worth fighting, even when victory seemed impossible. She couldn't know that Victor Langston was also struggling with the events of that day, questioning whether his pursuit of systematic excellence was creating systems that forgot why excellence mattered in the first place. The collision between their different philosophies was far from over, and the real cost of their misunderstanding was yet to be revealed. The final week of November brought with it the kind of relentless pressure that transforms Chicago's restaurants into theaters of controlled chaos. Thanksgiving had passed, leaving behind the exhaustion that comes from serving families whose holiday gatherings required the mediation of professional hospitality, and the December holiday season loomed with promises of increased business and elevated expectations. Clara had survived Victor's continued evaluation by maintaining the precarious balance between competence and compliance, but she could feel the growing tension in every interaction. Her natural instincts for personalized service repeatedly conflicted with the standardized procedures Victor was implementing, creating a daily struggle between authenticity and conformity that left her emotionally drained. The restaurant itself reflected this internal conflict. Financially, Bistro Lumiere was showing improved metrics, reduced operating costs, increased table turnover, streamlined service delivery. But these gains came at the expense of the intangible qualities that had made dining there feel special rather than simply efficient. Regular customers began commenting on the changes, some positively noting the quicker service, others expressing nostalgia for the restaurant's former warmth. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who had been Clara's Thursday evening regular, finally stopped coming after her third experience with servers who efficiently took her order, but failed to recognize her need for the gentle human connection that had made her weekly dinners bearable. Mr. Davidson, despite Clara's successful crisis management, began bringing his corporate groups to competitors who offered what he described as more personality with their professionalism. Marcus found his creative input increasingly constrained by corporate recipe requirements that left no room for seasonal adaptation or customer preference accommodation. The young couple saving for their wedding reluctantly shifted their Friday night tradition to a neighborhood bistro, where they could still find the kind of personalized attention that made their modest budget feel less limiting. Clara watched these changes with growing frustration, but her attempts to address them with Victor were met with data-driven responses that acknowledged short-term customer losses while emphasizing long-term operational sustainability. He showed her spreadsheets demonstrating improved profit margins, charts tracking reduced waste percentages, and projections indicating that initial customer adjustment issues would resolve as the restaurant's enhanced efficiency became established. Change always creates temporary disruption, Victor explained during one of their increasingly frequent operational discussions. But sustainable business success requires systems that function regardless of individual employee preferences or customer resistance to improvement. What Victor couldn't understand was that Clara's preferences weren't personal whims, but professional insights developed through years of observing what transformed ordinary meals into memorable experiences. Her resistance to his changes wasn't fear of innovation, but recognition that hospitality's essential humanity was being systematically eliminated in favor of processes that prioritized measurement over meaning. The breaking point came on the first Friday evening of December, during what should have been a celebration of the restaurant's improved quarterly performance. Victor had arranged for the corporate leadership team to dine at Bistro Lumiere, essentially using the evening service as a showcase for the successful implementation of his operational reforms. Clara was assigned to serve the corporate table, a decision that Victor framed as recognition of her competence, but felt to Clara like placement in the spotlight for final evaluation. The evening began with the kind of precise service delivery that reflected months of systematic training. Every course timed to perfection, every interaction scripted for efficiency, every detail executed according to updated protocols. But midway through the main course service, Clara witnessed something that crystallized her growing discomfort with Victor's approach. At table 12, an elderly gentleman dining alone was clearly struggling with his meal, not because of any service failure, but because the standardized portion sizes and rigid presentation had eliminated the flexibility that would have accommodated his obvious physical limitations. Under the previous management, Clara would have quietly arranged for his food to be cut into smaller pieces, perhaps suggesting modifications that would make his dining experience more comfortable, and certainly would have taken a few extra moments to ensure he felt cared for rather than accommodated. But Victor's efficiency standards discouraged such individualized attention as time-consuming exceptions that couldn't be systematically replicated. Clara watched the man struggle for several minutes, his dignity clearly suffering as he attempted to manage his meal without assistance. The server assigned to his section, following updated protocols, had completed the required check-in and moved on to maintain optimal table rotation. No policy violation had occurred, no inefficiency had been introduced, and the service met every standard Victor had established. But an elderly person was suffering unnecessarily because systematic efficiency had replaced human awareness, and Clara found herself unable to accept that this represented improvement in any meaningful sense. Without considering the consequences, she quietly approached table 12 and offered the gentle assistance that transformed the man's struggle into comfort, spending the extra few minutes that restored his dignity and made his evening bearable. Victor observed her deviation from the corporate table, noting her unauthorized section abandonment and protocol violation, with the growing frustration of someone whose carefully implemented systems were being undermined by employees who couldn't adapt to improved standards. The confrontation came immediately after service, in the empty dining room where their raised voices echoed off walls that had witnessed 3 years of Clara's dedicated service. Victor's criticism was comprehensive and final. Clara's inability to maintain boundaries, follow procedures, and respect the systematic improvements he had implemented made her unsuitable for the enhanced operational environment he was creating. "You're skilled at traditional service delivery," he concluded, "but you can't seem to understand that modern restaurant management requires different approaches. I'm afraid we're going to have to make a change." Clara felt the words impact her like physical blows. After 3 years of building relationships with customers, learning every aspect of the restaurant's operation, and developing expertise that went far beyond serving tables, she was being dismissed because her excellence didn't conform to corporate standards. "I've given everything to this place," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of betrayal and disbelief. "And we appreciate your dedication," Victor replied with the kind of professional politeness that felt more insulting than direct hostility. "But appreciation doesn't change the fact that your approach isn't compatible with our operational goals." The final indignity came when Victor offered her 2 weeks severance pay and a letter of recommendation that praised her traditional service skills while diplomatically avoiding mention of her broader capabilities. As if 3 years of institutional knowledge, customer relationships, and operational insights could be reduced to a brief corporate formality. Clara cleaned out her locker that night, removing personal items that had accumulated during years of treating the restaurant as her professional home. A spare uniform, comfortable shoes, the small succulent plant she'd kept on the break room windowsill, and the framed photo of her mother that had reminded her daily of why she worked so hard. These modest possessions felt heavier than they should have, as Clara prepared to leave behind everything familiar. The bus ride home that night felt like traveling through a foreign city. Chicago's skyline seemed indifferent to her suddenly uncertain future, its illuminated windows representing opportunities that had never belonged to her, and now felt more distant than ever. At 38, Clara faced the prospect of starting over in an industry that had become increasingly corporate, with a resume that apparently qualified her only for traditional service positions in a field that was systematically eliminating everything she found meaningful about the work. But even in her devastation, Clara carried something that Victor Langston's corporate reforms couldn't touch: the absolute certainty that hospitality worth preserving required human connection that couldn't be systematized, personal attention that couldn't be optimized, and individual care that couldn't be scaled. Her employment at Bistro Lumiere had ended, but her understanding of what made dining transformational rather than merely transactional had only deepened. As she unlocked the door to her modest apartment, Clara couldn't know that her dismissal was about to become the catalyst for discoveries that would change both her understanding of her own capabilities and Victor's understanding of what he had lost. The story of their conflict was far from over, and the real lessons were yet to be learned. The silence after termination felt like the hollow echo that follows a door slamming shut on everything familiar. Clara spent her first morning of unemployment sitting at her small kitchen table, still wearing the uniform she had forgotten to return, staring at a cup of coffee that had grown cold while she tried to process the sudden absence of routine that had structured her life for 3 years. The severance check represented exactly 14 days of her regular income, a corporate calculation of her professional worth that felt both generous and insulting. Generous because she had been fired rather than laid off, insulting because it reduced 3 years of dedicated service to a mathematical formula designed to minimize legal liability rather than acknowledge personal investment. Clara's studio apartment, which had always felt cozy in its modest efficiency, now seemed to contract around her like a physical manifestation of her suddenly limited prospects. The walls held reminders of the life she had built around her work at Bistro Lumiere, photographs of co-workers during rare shared moments of celebration, a small collection of wine bottles given by appreciative customers, the comfortable shoes that had carried her through thousands of hours of service now sitting uselessly by the door. The practical implications of unemployment in Chicago's expensive rental market began asserting themselves with mathematical precision. Clara's careful budgeting had always operated on narrow margins, with little room for the kind of extended job searching that might lead to positions worthy of her experience. The healthcare coverage provided through the restaurant would end within weeks, leaving her mother's prescription costs entirely uncovered just as winter increased the likelihood of medical complications. But the financial stress, while immediate and frightening, wasn't the deepest wound. Clara found herself grieving the loss of purpose that had made even the most difficult shifts meaningful. For 3 years, she had awakened each morning knowing that her work mattered to specific people in measurable ways, that Mrs. Patterson's Thursday evenings were less lonely because of Clara's attention, that Mr. Davidson's business dinners succeeded partly because of her professional skill, that dozens of regular customers trusted her to make their dining experiences special. The restaurant industry's networking possibilities, which had never seemed particularly relevant while she was steadily employed, now revealed their importance through their absence. Clara realized that her professional relationships had been almost entirely contained within Bistro Lumiere, leaving her without the broader industry connections that might lead to comparable positions. Her expertise, while substantial, was also specialized in ways that didn't translate obviously to other restaurant environments. During her second week of unemployment, Clara began the dispiriting process of job applications that reduced her professional identity to standardized forms that had no space for describing the intangible skills that had made her valuable. How could she quantify her ability to recognize customers' unspoken needs? What metric could capture her talent for transforming difficult situations into demonstrations of exceptional service? Which corporate buzzword adequately described her gift for making strangers feel welcomed and valued? The interviews she secured reinforced her growing understanding that the restaurant industry was systematically moving away from the personalized service that had been her specialty. Chain establishments wanted employees who could execute standardized procedures without deviation. Upscale restaurants increasingly favored servers who looked the part but lacked the experience to command higher salaries. Independent restaurateurs, while potentially more appreciative of her skills, often lacked the resources to offer sustainable employment with benefits. Meanwhile, at Bistro Lumiere, Victor Langston was discovering the unexpected consequences of systematic improvement. The restaurant's operational metrics continued to show positive trends. Costs remained controlled, service delivery maintained acceptable efficiency, and customer complaints had actually decreased as expectations adjusted to the new standards. But something subtler and more troubling was emerging in customer behavior patterns. Regular customers weren't returning at previous frequencies. New customers seemed satisfied but rarely became repeat visitors. Staff turnover was increasing as experienced servers grew frustrated with reduced autonomy and newer hires struggled to master procedures without understanding their purpose. The restaurant was functioning smoothly but felt increasingly hollow, like a beautiful theater where all the technical elements worked perfectly, but the performance lacked soul. Victor found himself making unexpected visits to the restaurant during off hours, standing in the empty dining room and trying to identify what felt different. The space looked identical, same elegant decor, same carefully arranged furniture, same ambient lighting, but something essential had changed. The restaurant felt like a stage set rather than a living space where human stories played out over shared meals. His corporate superiors were pleased with Bistro Lumiere's performance metrics, noting the successful implementation of systematic improvements that could be replicated across other properties in the growing portfolio. Victor's handling of the transition was being cited as a model for future acquisitions, and his own career prospects had never been brighter. His investment portfolio, buoyed by the restaurant group's consistent growth, had pushed his net worth well into the hundreds of millions, with diversified holdings in real estate, technology startups, and cryptocurrency futures that provided financial security beyond most people's comprehension. But success, Victor was learning, could feel hollow when achieved through methods that eliminated the very qualities that had made the work meaningful in the first place. His restaurants generated impressive profits, his business reputation continued to grow, and his personal wealth reached levels that provided every material comfort. Yet he found himself questioning whether optimization had optimized away the human elements that transformed dining from consumption into experience. The catalyst for change came from an unexpected source, a letter that arrived 3 weeks after Clara's departure, forwarded through the restaurant's management office. The elegant stationery bore the letterhead of a prominent Chicago food critic whose reviews carried significant influence over the city's dining scene. "Dear Mr. Langston," the letter began, "I am writing to express concern about recent changes at Bistro Lumiere, a restaurant I have long considered among Chicago's hidden gems for consistently exceptional hospitality." The critic went on to describe several recent dining experiences that, while technically competent, lacked the personal attention and authentic warmth that had previously distinguished the restaurant. Most significantly, the letter specifically mentioned Clara Martinez as an example of the kind of server who elevated dining from mere consumption to genuine hospitality. Ms. Martinez possessed that rare combination of professional skill and personal grace that made every visit feel special, the critic wrote. Her absence is immediately noticeable and deeply regrettable. Whatever operational improvements you have implemented, they appear to have come at the cost of the human connections that made Bistro Lumiere truly memorable. Victor read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of discomfort. He had achieved his operational goals through methods that had eliminated not just inefficiencies, but the individual expertise that had made the restaurant worth visiting. Clara Martinez, whom he had dismissed as a competent but limited employee, had apparently been recognized by industry professionals as exemplifying the very qualities he was trying to systematize. The realization forced Victor to confront uncomfortable questions about the relationship between efficiency and excellence, between systematic improvement and authentic hospitality. His business training had taught him to measure success through quantifiable metrics, but Clara's departure had seemingly removed something that couldn't be measured yet, was immediately missed by people whose opinions determined the restaurant's reputation. That evening, for the first time since acquiring Bistro Lumiere, Victor found himself genuinely questioning whether his improvements had improved anything meaningful. Standing in his downtown penthouse, surrounded by the material evidence of his professional success, he felt the strange emptiness that comes from achieving goals that no longer seem worth achieving. The city lights sparkled below his floor-to-ceiling windows, like a constellation of possibilities. But Victor found himself thinking not about expansion opportunities or profit optimization, but about a waitress whose quiet competence had apparently meant more to customers than all his systematic reforms combined. Clara Martinez was somewhere in that glittering cityscape, probably struggling with unemployment and uncertain about her future, while he enjoyed the financial security that came from making decisions that eliminated people like her from industries they had served with dedication. The irony wasn't lost on him, even if he wasn't yet ready to act on his growing discomfort with what success had required him to become. The letter sat on his marble kitchen counter overnight, its elegant language a persistent reminder that optimization might have optimized away the very qualities that made optimization worthwhile. By morning, Victor would face a choice between maintaining the profitable systems he had created and acknowledging that some forms of value couldn't be systematized without being destroyed. December's harsh geometry of shortened days and bitter winds transformed Chicago into a city that demanded resilience from anyone without the resources to escape its challenges. Clara had been unemployed for 6 weeks, long enough for the initial shock to evolve into the grinding anxiety of diminishing savings and expanding uncertainty. Her morning routine had adapted to the rhythm of job searching, rising early to check online postings before the best opportunities were flooded with applications, spending hours crafting cover letters that somehow needed to convey 3 years of expertise in formats designed for recent graduates or career changers. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was overqualified for entry-level positions, yet lacked the management credentials for senior roles that matched her actual experience. The restaurant industry's employment landscape reflected broader economic pressures that made experienced servers expensive liabilities rather than valuable assets. Chain establishments could train enthusiastic college students to follow procedures for half Clara's previous salary, while upscale restaurants increasingly preferred servers whose youth and appearance aligned with carefully crafted brand images designed to attract affluent customers who valued style over substance. Clara's age, which had represented maturity and reliability at Bistro Lumiere, became a subtle barrier in interviews where managers seemed more interested in how she looked carrying trays than how effectively she managed complex service situations. Her expertise in wine service, crisis management, and customer relations, skills that had made her invaluable in practice, didn't translate into obvious advantages in application processes that prioritized availability for double shifts over evidence of professional competence. The financial pressure intensified as Christmas approached. Clara's mother, Rosa, needed increasingly expensive medications for diabetes and hypertension, conditions that had developed during decades of working multiple jobs without adequate healthcare coverage. The small savings account Clara had built over 3 years of careful budgeting was disappearing with mathematical precision. Rent, utilities, groceries, and medical expenses consuming her resources faster than unemployment benefits could replace them. But perhaps more challenging than the financial stress was the psychological impact of professional rejection. Each unsuccessful interview reinforced Clara's growing suspicion that her skills, while real and valuable, weren't valued by an industry that had evolved toward standardization and cost control. The personalized service that had been her specialty was being systematically eliminated in favor of efficient delivery systems that required fewer experienced employees and generated higher profit margins. Clara found herself questioning not just her immediate prospects, but her fundamental understanding of her own professional worth. Had she been deluding herself about her expertise? Were the customer relationships she had cherished merely pleasant interactions that had no actual business value? Was Victor Langston correct that her resistance to systematic improvement reflected inability to adapt rather than insight into why such improvements might be counterproductive? The doubt was more corrosive than unemployment itself, threatening to dissolve the quiet confidence that had sustained Clara through years of challenging work. She began second-guessing decisions that had previously felt natural, wondering whether her instincts for personalized service were outdated, romanticizing of work that was properly understood as efficient execution of standardized procedures. Meanwhile, Victor Langston was experiencing his own form of professional discomfort, though his challenges were cushioned by financial security that made them philosophical rather than practical. The critic's letter had been followed by similar feedback from other industry observers who noted Bistro Lumiere's transformation from distinctive dining destination to competently managed restaurant that offered nothing particularly compelling. The restaurant's financial performance remained strong, meeting all the operational targets Victor had established and generating the kind of consistent returns that satisfied corporate investors. But customer loyalty metrics showed troubling trends. Repeat visit frequency had declined, average party sizes were smaller, and the restaurant was increasingly dependent on one-time diners rather than the regular customers who had once formed its core clientele. Victor's business training provided analytical frameworks for understanding these trends, but his solutions, adjusted pricing strategies, enhanced marketing campaigns, loyalty programs designed to encourage repeat visits, felt mechanistic and inadequate. The changes reflected deeper problems that couldn't be addressed through conventional business interventions. Most troubling was Victor's growing recognition that the systematic improvements he had implemented might have eliminated precisely the qualities that had made the restaurant worth optimizing in the first place. His corporate efficiency had reduced costs and streamlined operations, but it had also systematically removed the human irregularities that had made dining at Bistro Lumière feel personal rather than transactional. The realization crystallized during a December evening when Victor found himself dining alone at his own restaurant, observing the service with fresh perspective informed by weeks of uncomfortable reflection. The staff executed their duties with technical competence. Orders were taken accurately, food was delivered promptly, tables were cleared efficiently. But the dining room felt hollow, despite being nearly full. He watched servers interact with customers according to the protocols he had established, noting the absence of the spontaneous conversations, unexpected accommodations, and personal attention that had apparently differentiated the restaurant under previous management. The service was professional but generic, competent but forgettable, efficient but lacking the authentic warmth that transformed meals into experiences worth remembering and repeating. Victor's table was served by Rebecca, the young server whom Clara had helped during the crisis with Mr. Davidson months earlier. She performed her duties with careful precision, following every procedure he had established and meeting every standard he had implemented. Yet, something essential was missing: the intuitive understanding of customer needs that had made Clara exceptional at work, that others treated as merely adequate employment. After the meal, Victor found himself walking through Chicago's downtown corridors, passing restaurants where warm light spilled onto winter sidewalks, and promising the kind of authentic hospitality he had systematically eliminated from his own establishment. The contrast was stark and troubling. Other restaurants seemed to offer the very qualities he had optimized away in pursuit of operational excellence. His penthouse apartment, with its panoramic views of the city's glittering skyline and museum-quality furnishings that reflected his considerable wealth, felt particularly empty that night. The space was beautiful and expensive, but lacked the lived-in warmth that came from human connection rather than professional decoration. Victor realized that his personal life had begun to mirror his professional approach, technically perfect, but emotionally hollow. The parallel wasn't coincidental. Success that came from optimizing human elements out of human endeavors created environments that functioned smoothly but felt sterile. Victor had built a restaurant empire and accumulated substantial wealth through methods that systematically eliminated the very qualities that made either achievement meaningful. That night, for the first time since Clara's departure, Victor found himself genuinely missing not just her professional competence, but her approach to work that treated every customer interaction as an opportunity for authentic human connection. He had dismissed her methods as inefficient and unscalable, but her absence had revealed that efficiency without humanity wasn't improvement. It was diminishment. The recognition forced Victor to confront uncomfortable questions about the trajectory of his professional success and personal satisfaction. His restaurants generated impressive profits, his investment portfolio continued growing, and his industry reputation had never been stronger. But these achievements had come at the cost of eliminating people like Clara Martinez, whose understanding of hospitality represented everything he had forgotten how to value. As winter deepened around Chicago's magnificent and unforgiving architecture, both Victor and Clara were learning difficult lessons about the relationship between professional success and personal fulfillment, between systematic improvement and authentic excellence, between what could be measured and what actually mattered. Their paths had diverged after their conflict at Bistro Lumière, but the education each was receiving would eventually bring them back together in ways neither could anticipate. The revelation came wrapped in the mundane disguise of routine corporate paperwork, but its implications would unravel everything Victor thought he understood about Clara's departure and his own judgment as a business leader. 6 weeks into January, while reviewing quarterly reports and vendor agreements in preparation for his next acquisition, Victor discovered a discrepancy that initially seemed like a simple accounting error. The food cost reports for Bistro Lumiere's final quarter under previous management showed unexplained variances that corporate auditors had flagged for investigation. Victor had assumed these represented the kind of operational inefficiencies his systematic improvements were designed to eliminate, but closer examination revealed something far more troubling. The discrepancies weren't random waste or theft, but consistent patterns that suggested deliberate manipulation of purchasing records and inventory reports. Someone had been systematically inflating food costs and skimming the difference, using sophisticated methods that required detailed knowledge of restaurant operations and vendor relationships. Victor's initial investigation uncovered evidence pointing to Janet Morrison, the interim manager who had supervised the staff during his acquisition and evaluation process. Financial records showed that Janet had been approving inflated invoices from certain suppliers and pocketing rebates that should have been credited to the restaurant's accounts. The scheme had been operating for months, costing the restaurant tens of thousands of dollars while providing Janet with unreported income that probably exceeded her legitimate salary. But the most damaging discovery was yet to come. While reviewing the incident reports filed around the time of Clara's termination, Victor found evidence that Janet had deliberately created the service crisis that led to Clara's dismissal. The miscommunication that resulted in the costly order mistake, the incident Victor had used to justify Clara's termination, had been manufactured by Janet to deflect attention from her own financial improprieties. The paper trail was devastating in its clarity. Janet had purposely provided incorrect information to the kitchen about corporate guests' dietary restrictions, knowing that the resulting confusion would create exactly the kind of expensive, embarrassing situation that would require someone to accept blame. Clara, as the most visible and experienced server, had been positioned perfectly to serve as a scapegoat for problems she hadn't created, but was professionally obligated to help resolve. Victor's examination of security footage from that evening confirmed the manipulation. The recordings showed Janet deliberately failing to communicate crucial information, then positioning herself to observe the resulting chaos while maintaining plausible deniability. Clara's efforts to manage the crisis, the very actions Victor had criticized as protocol violations, were revealed as professional competence responding to deliberately created emergencies. The realization hit Victor like a physical blow. He had terminated one of his most capable employees based on false information provided by someone who was stealing from the restaurant. Clara's supposed inability to follow procedures was actually evidence of her superior understanding of when procedures needed to be abandoned in favor of genuine customer care. Her resistance to his systematic improvements wasn't stubborn traditionalism, but professional insight, recognizing that some changes would eliminate essential qualities rather than enhance operational efficiency. The financial audit that followed revealed the full scope of Janet's theft and manipulation. Over 18 months, she had systematically diverted nearly $200,000 through various schemes that required intimate knowledge of restaurant operations and vendor relationships. Her position as interim manager had provided perfect cover for financial crimes that were sophisticated enough to escape detection until Victor's accidental discovery. But the monetary loss, while significant, paled beside the recognition of how completely Victor had misjudged the situation. He had allowed a criminal to manipulate his evaluation process, resulting in the termination of an exceptional employee, while the actual source of operational problems remained in position to continue causing damage. The legal implications were serious enough to require corporate attorneys and forensic accountants, but Victor's personal reckoning with his failure of judgment proved more challenging than any potential litigation. He had prided himself on analytical thinking and systematic evaluation, yet he had been completely deceived by someone whose criminal behavior should have been detectable through proper investigation. More troubling than his failure to identify Janet's theft was his complete misjudgment of Clara's character and capabilities. Every criticism he had made of her performance was revealed as either misunderstanding of her methods or acceptance of false information provided by someone with criminal motives for discrediting her. Clara's tendency to deviate from procedures was actually evidence of professional expertise that recognized when flexibility served customers better than rigid adherence to rules. Her excessive attention to individual customer needs was precisely the quality that distinguished exceptional hospitality from merely adequate service. Her resistance to systematic improvements reflected understanding that some changes would eliminate the very qualities that made improvement worthwhile. The critic's letter, which Victor had initially dismissed as nostalgic resistance to necessary modernization, was revealed as accurate assessment of what the restaurant had lost when Clara departed. Customer feedback that had seemed like inevitable adjustment to improved procedures was actually recognition that something valuable had been eliminated rather than enhanced. Victor found himself confronting the uncomfortable reality that his business success had been built partly on eliminating people whose understanding of hospitality was superior to his own systematic approach. He had optimized away precisely the qualities that made optimization worthwhile, then convinced himself that the resulting efficiency represented improvement. The parallels to his personal life were impossible to ignore. His relationships, like his restaurants, had become systematized interactions that functioned smoothly, but lacked the spontaneous warmth that made human connection meaningful. His considerable wealth provided material comfort, but couldn't compensate for the emotional hollowness that came from treating people as variables in equations rather than individuals deserving of authentic attention. That evening, standing in his penthouse apartment surrounded by expensive furnishings that reflected financial success rather than personal taste, Victor made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. He would find Clara Martinez and offer her not just an apology, but an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of restaurant management that honored both operational excellence and human connection. The decision wasn't motivated by guilt, though he felt plenty of that, or by business calculation, though he recognized the commercial value of exceptional hospitality. Victor acted from the growing conviction that his professional success would remain hollow until it incorporated the kind of authentic care that Clara had brought to work he had dismissed as merely adequate service. Finding Clara wouldn't be difficult. Chicago's restaurant industry was interconnected enough that a few phone calls would locate someone with her experience and reputation. But approaching her would require the kind of humility that successful people rarely need to exercise, and offering her genuine partnership rather than traditional employment would demand changes to his business model that went far beyond personnel decisions. Victor realized that true redemption would require not just admitting his mistakes, but demonstrating through actionable change that he had learned why those mistakes mattered. Clara Martinez deserved more than apology. She deserved opportunity to show what restaurant management looked like when it prioritized human connection alongside operational efficiency. The January wind rattled his windows like a reminder of the cold reception his offer might receive. But Victor felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the anticipation that comes from acting on convictions rather than calculations. For the first time since his business empire had made him wealthy, he was about to do something because it was right rather than because it was profitable. The discovery of Clara Martinez in her current circumstances felt like finding a diamond that someone had discarded in an alley, then watching it maintain its brilliance despite being surrounded by debris. Victor located her through a series of industry contacts who spoke of her with the kind of professional respect usually reserved for successful restaurateurs rather than unemployed servers. She was working at Manny's Deli on Maxwell Street, a Chicago institution that had been serving the city's working class for over 70 years. The restaurant was everything Bistro Lumiere was not: unpretentious, loud, authentically neighborhood-focused, and completely indifferent to the kind of systematic improvements Victor specialized in implementing. Yet, even in this environment, Clara had apparently found ways to demonstrate the exceptional service that had made her valuable. Victor arrived on a bitter February afternoon, when Chicago's winter had settled into the kind of relentless cold that transforms the city into a test of endurance. Manny's Deli occupied a storefront that looked unchanged since the 1950s, its windows fogged with condensation from hot coffee and conversation, its interior lit by harsh fluorescent lights that revealed every scratch and stain accumulated through decades of honest service. The contrast with Bistro Lumiere's elegant ambiance couldn't have been starker, yet Victor immediately noticed something that had been missing from his upscale restaurant: the sound of genuine laughter, the warmth of repeated greetings between staff and regular customers, the comfortable chaos that came from prioritizing human connection over operational efficiency. Clara was behind the counter, wearing a simple uniform that couldn't disguise her natural grace or professional competence. Victor watched her serve customers with the same intuitive awareness of individual needs that had made her exceptional at Bistro Lumiere. Adapted now to an environment where exceptional meant remembering how each regular customer preferred their coffee rather than which wine paired best with seasonal entrees. But even in reduced circumstances, Clara's capabilities were evident. She managed multiple orders simultaneously while maintaining personal conversations, anticipated customers' needs before they expressed them, and somehow managed to make the hectic lunch rush feel orderly despite working with equipment and systems that belonged in a restaurant museum. Victor waited until the crowd thinned before approaching the counter. Uncertain how to begin a conversation that needed to accomplish several difficult things simultaneously, acknowledge his misjudgment, explain the circumstances that had revealed her innocence, and propose collaboration that would allow her to demonstrate capabilities he had been too blind to recognize. "Hello, Clara," he said simply, his voice carrying none of the corporate authority that had characterized their previous interactions. Clara looked up from wiping the counter, her expression cycling through surprise, wariness, and carefully controlled professionalism. "Mr. Langston," she replied neutrally, her tone providing no indication of her thoughts or feelings about his unexpected appearance. "I need to talk with you about what happened at Bistro Lumiere," Victor continued. "I've discovered information that changes everything I thought I understood about your termination." The conversation that followed took place in a corner booth where the deli's ambient noise provided privacy for Victor's explanation of Janet Morrison's criminal behavior and the systematic manipulation that had led to Clara's dismissal. He presented the evidence methodically, watching Clara's expression shift from skepticism to understanding to a kind of vindicated sadness that was more dignified than anger. "I misjudged you completely," Victor concluded. "Your resistance to my changes wasn't inability to adapt. It was professional insight, recognizing that some of my improvements would eliminate the very qualities that made improvement worthwhile." Clara listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as details confirmed suspicions she had harbored, but couldn't prove. When Victor finished his explanation, she remained silent for several moments, processing not just the vindication, but the implications of what his presence meant. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked finally, her voice carrying the wariness of someone who had learned to be suspicious of offers that seemed too convenient. "Because I want to offer you an opportunity that matches your actual capabilities," Victor replied. "Not just your job back, but partnership in creating the kind of restaurant that honors both operational excellence and authentic hospitality." What Victor proposed wasn't traditional employment, but genuine collaboration. Clara would become general manager of Bistro Lumiere, with autonomous authority over all service operations, while Victor focused on financial management and business development. She would have opportunity to implement her vision of hospitality that prioritized human connection alongside systematic efficiency, with budget and staffing decisions under her control rather than corporate oversight. The offer was more generous than Clara had imagined possible, but it also represented risks that extended beyond potential disappointment. Accepting would mean trusting someone who had previously misjudged her character and dismissed her expertise. It would require believing that Victor's recognition of his mistakes reflected genuine change rather than temporary guilt or business calculation. More fundamentally, Clara would need to believe in herself sufficiently to accept responsibility for outcomes that would be publicly visible and professionally consequential. Managing a restaurant represented transition from serving other people's vision to implementing her own, with all the accountability and pressure that such authority entailed. "I need time to consider your offer," Clara said after Victor finished explaining the proposed partnership structure. "Of course," Victor replied, understanding that trust required demonstration rather than declaration. "But while you're considering, I want you to know that your understanding of hospitality is what I've been trying to systematize without recognizing that systematization was eliminating its essential qualities." As Victor left Manny's Deli that afternoon, walking through Chicago's brutal winter air toward his warm car and comfortable apartment, he carried with him the recognition that redemption required more than acknowledgement of mistakes. Clara Martinez deserved not just opportunity, but proof that the opportunity represented genuine respect for capabilities he had been too arrogant to recognize previously. The ball was now in Clara's court, and Victor understood that her decision would reveal whether his belated recognition of her worth could overcome the damage caused by his initial blindness to everything that made her exceptional. For the first time in his business career, Victor found himself hoping for acceptance of an offer that mattered more for what it represented than what it would cost him to provide. Clara's answer came 3 days later, delivered not through phone call or email, but through her appearance at Bistro Lumiere on a snowy Thursday morning when the restaurant was closed for cleaning and inventory. Victor found her standing in the empty dining room, still wearing her coat, studying the space with the analytical attention of someone envisioning possibilities rather than simply observing current conditions. "I've decided to accept your offer," she said without preamble, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who had made a difficult decision and was prepared to live with its consequences. "But I have conditions that go beyond our previous discussion." The conditions Clara presented reflected not just professional requirements, but fundamental principles about how the restaurant would operate under her management. She wanted guarantee that no employee would be terminated without her consultation and approval. She insisted on autonomy over hiring decisions, menu development, and service protocols, with Victor's input welcomed, but not determinative. Most importantly, she required commitment that the restaurant would prioritize authentic hospitality over metrics that could be measured, but might not indicate actual success. "I want to create something that honors both your business expertise and what I've learned about why people really come to restaurants," Clara explained. "It's not just about food or efficiency. It's about feeling welcomed, understood, and cared for in ways that make ordinary evenings feel special." Victor agreed to every condition, recognizing that Clara's requirements reflected precisely the kind of thinking he needed to incorporate into his approach to restaurant management. Her insistence on employee consultation and autonomy over service decisions wasn't resistance to accountability, but understanding that exceptional hospitality required trust and flexibility that couldn't be achieved through corporate oversight. The transformation of Bistro Lumiere began immediately, but unlike Victor's previous systematic reforms, Clara's changes emerged organically from understanding why specific modifications would enhance rather than diminish the restaurant's essential character. She reinstated the complimentary bread service, not as unnecessary expense, but as investment in making guests feel welcomed from the moment they were seated. The standardized corporate recipes were replaced with seasonal menus that showcased Marcus's creativity while maintaining consistent quality standards. Clara worked with the kitchen staff to develop dishes that honored both culinary excellence and the kind of comfort food memories that made dining emotionally satisfying rather than merely nutritionally adequate. But the most significant changes were subtler, involving the restoration of service protocols that prioritized individual customer needs over operational efficiency metrics. Servers were encouraged to spend time with guests who wanted conversation, to accommodate special requests that weren't specifically prohibited, and to exercise judgment about when standard procedures should be modified to serve customer satisfaction. Clara rehired several experienced servers who had been dismissed during Victor's efficiency improvements, recognizing that their institutional knowledge and customer relationships represented assets that couldn't be replaced through training programs. She also retained some of the newer staff who had adapted well to Victor's systems, creating a team that balanced experience with enthusiasm, expertise with energy. The relationship between Clara and Victor evolved into genuine collaboration that utilized both their strengths while acknowledging their different perspectives on restaurant management. Victor's analytical skills and business connections proved invaluable for managing costs, developing vendor relationships, and planning expansion opportunities. Clara's intuitive understanding of hospitality and customer psychology provided the human insights that transformed operational efficiency into memorable experience. Within 6 months, Bistro Lumiere had regained its reputation as one of Chicago's most consistently excellent restaurants. But now that excellence was supported by business systems that ensured sustainability rather than sacrificing quality for short-term profit optimization. Customer loyalty metrics showed dramatic improvement, with repeat visit frequency returning to previous levels, while average spending increased due to enhanced satisfaction rather than higher prices. The restaurant industry took notice of the transformation, with food critics and business publications featuring Bistro Lumiere as an example of how hospitality excellence and operational efficiency could enhance rather than compete with each other. Clara found herself speaking at industry conferences about service management, while Victor's reputation expanded beyond pure business success to include recognition for innovative approaches to human resource development. But perhaps the most meaningful vindication came from customers who noticed and appreciated the restaurant's renewed commitment to authentic hospitality. Mrs. Patterson returned to her Thursday evening dinners, finding the personal attention and gentle care that had made her difficult transition into widowhood more bearable. Mr. Davidson resumed bringing corporate groups to the restaurant, confident that the service would enhance rather than distract from important business conversations. The young couple saving for their wedding returned to their Friday night tradition, discovering that their limited budget was treated with respect rather than inadequate enthusiasm. Regular customers who had drifted away during Victor's efficiency-focused period found reasons to return, while new guests became regulars at rates that suggested sustainable growth rather than temporary increases. Clara's success as general manager exceeded both her own expectations and Victor's projections, but more importantly, it validated her belief that exceptional hospitality required human connection that couldn't be systematized without being diminished. Her approach to restaurant management honored both business realities and service ideals, creating an environment where operational excellence supported rather than replaced authentic customer care. Victor's recognition of his previous mistakes and willingness to trust Clara's expertise represented more than professional redemption. It demonstrated that successful people could learn from their errors and adapt their methods without abandoning their goals. His restaurant empire continued to grow and generate impressive returns, but now that success was built on understanding rather than systematically eliminating the human elements that made success meaningful. As Chicago's seasons cycled from the harsh beauty of winter through the renewal of spring toward the abundance of summer, Bistro Lumiere stood as proof that business success and human dignity could enhance each other when guided by people who understood why both mattered. Clara Martinez had transformed from dismissed waitress to respected restaurant manager, but more importantly, she had demonstrated that competence combined with compassion could create value that transcended any metric corporate evaluation systems were capable of measuring. The morning sun painted Chicago's skyline in shades of gold and amber as Clara stood in Bistro Lumiere's dining room, reviewing the reservation book that showed another fully booked evening ahead. 18 months had passed since her return to the restaurant as general manager, 18 months of rebuilding not just operational excellence, but the kind of institutional trust that transforms dining establishments from businesses into community gathering places. The transformation was now complete enough to be taken for granted, which Clara recognized as the ultimate measure of successful change. Customers no longer commented on the restaurant's return to warmth and personal service. It simply was warm and personal, as naturally as sunrise followed dawn. The staff moved through their duties with confidence that came from understanding both their responsibilities and their authority to exercise judgment when situations required flexibility over procedure. Victor arrived that morning as he did most Tuesdays, not for corporate oversight, but for the kind of collaborative planning session that had become the foundation of their professional partnership. He carried coffee from Manny's Deli, a small gesture that acknowledged Clara's recent past while celebrating their current collaboration, and the Chicago Tribune folded to the business section, where a feature article about their restaurant management model had appeared that morning. "We're becoming famous," Victor said with a smile that mixed genuine pleasure with mild embarrassment at the public attention their success was generating. Clara accepted the coffee gratefully, noting that Victor had remembered she preferred it with light cream and no sugar, the kind of personal detail that seemed insignificant until its absence revealed how much authentic attention actually mattered. "The article is fair," she replied, scanning the newspaper's description of their collaborative approach to hospitality management. The Tribune piece, written by the same food critic whose letter had prompted Victor's initial reconsideration of Clara's termination, described Bistro Lumière as proof that exceptional hospitality and operational efficiency can enhance each other when guided by leaders who understand that restaurants succeed by feeding souls as well as bodies. The article went on to detail specific examples of how Clara's service philosophy had been supported rather than constrained by Victor's business systems. But the real validation came not from newspaper coverage, but from the daily evidence that their approach was creating value for everyone involved. Employee turnover had dropped to among the lowest rates in Chicago's competitive restaurant industry. Customer satisfaction scores reached levels that impressed even experienced industry analysts. Financial performance exceeded previous benchmarks while maintaining cost structures that allowed for employee benefits and wage increases that made the work sustainable as well as rewarding. Clara's own transformation had been perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the restaurant's renaissance. Her transition from server to manager had revealed capabilities that even she hadn't fully recognized, but more importantly, it had demonstrated that expertise developed through ground-level experience could inform executive decision-making in ways that formal business training alone couldn't provide. She had become a sought-after speaker at hospitality industry conferences, sharing insights about service management that honored both customer needs and employee dignity. Her presentations frequently sold out, drawing audiences of restaurant owners, managers, and service professionals who were searching for alternatives to the corporate efficiency models that had dominated the industry for decades. Victor's professional reputation had also evolved, from successful businessman who optimized struggling restaurants into profitable enterprises to industry innovator who demonstrated that human-centered management could enhance rather than compromise financial performance. His restaurant empire continued to expand, but now each new acquisition was approached through Clara's collaborative methodology rather than systematic elimination of inefficiencies that might actually represent essential qualities. Their partnership had attracted attention from business schools and management consultants who were interested in documenting methods that achieved superior results through apparently contradictory combination of rigorous business discipline and flexible human responsiveness. Several major restaurant corporations had approached them about consulting relationships that would allow replication of their model across larger organizational structures. But Clara remained focused on the daily work of making Bistro Lumière exceptional rather than famous. Each evening service was approached as an opportunity rather than a routine. Each customer interaction treated as a chance to demonstrate that hospitality was fundamentally about recognizing and responding to human needs that went beyond efficient food delivery. Mrs. Odd Patterson still came for Thursday evening dinners, but now she was often joined by other regular customers who had formed informal friendships through their shared appreciation for the restaurant's authentic, warm atmosphere. Mr. Davidson continued bringing corporate groups, but he had also started dining there with his family, drawn by the restaurant's ability to make even his teenagers feel welcomed and valued. The young couple who had been saving for their wedding had become Mr. and Mrs. Chen, celebrating their first anniversary at the table where they had shared so many Friday evening chocolate soufflés during their engagement. Their wedding reception, held in Bistro Lumiere's private dining room, had been Clara's first major event management challenge, and had resulted in photographs that now graced the restaurant's social media presence as evidence of what celebrations looked like when guided by genuine care. Marcus had evolved from frustrated sous chef to culinary partner whose seasonal menu innovations were supported by both Clara's service expertise and Victor's vendor relationships. His creativity was no longer constrained by corporate recipe requirements, but enhanced by access to premium ingredients and freedom to develop dishes that told stories rather than simply meeting cost targets. The entire staff had embraced their roles as hospitality professionals rather than food service workers, understanding that their work contributed to experiences that customers would remember and share rather than simply consume and forget. This elevation of purpose translated into personal pride that enhanced job satisfaction while improving customer experience in ways that generated both loyalty and positive word-of-mouth marketing. As Clara and Victor concluded their Tuesday morning planning session, reviewing reservations, discussing staffing schedules, and evaluating vendor proposals, they both understood that their collaboration had created something that transcended either of their individual capabilities. Clara's intuitive understanding of hospitality and Victor's analytical business skills had combined to produce results that neither could have achieved alone. But perhaps more importantly, their partnership had demonstrated that success didn't require choosing between human dignity and operational efficiency, between employee satisfaction and financial performance, between authentic hospitality and systematic business management. The false choices that had driven Victor's original approach to restaurant optimization had been revealed as unnecessary limitations rather than unavoidable trade-offs. The afternoon brought its usual parade of deliveries, staff meetings, and preparation for evening service. Clara moved through these responsibilities with the comfortable authority that came from knowing her decisions were trusted and respected rather than second-guessed and overruled. She consulted with Marcus about an end-of-summer menu featuring locally sourced ingredients, reviewed scheduling requests from servers who were balancing work with education or family responsibilities, and handled the dozens of small decisions that kept the restaurant operating smoothly. As the dinner hour approached and the first customers began arriving, Clara took her customary position where she could observe the entire dining room while remaining available for any situation that required management attention. The scene that unfolded was familiar, yet never routine. Couples celebrating anniversaries, families introducing children to restaurant dining, business associates transforming professional relationships into personal friendships over expertly prepared meals and attentive service. Each table represented a story in progress, and Clara understood that her role was to support those stories rather than simply efficiently process customers through predetermined service sequences. This philosophy, which had once been dismissed as impossibly inefficient, had proven to be not just sustainable but superior to any alternative approach she could imagine. Victor arrived for dinner that evening, not as owner conducting inspection, but as customer who genuinely enjoyed eating at his own restaurant. He was joined by a potential business partner from Denver who was interested in learning about their management methodology. And Clara watched Victor explain their approach with genuine enthusiasm rather than corporate marketing presentation. The evening concluded, as most did, with satisfied customers departing into Chicago's glittering night, staff completing closing procedures with the pride that came from work well done, and Clara reviewing the day's successes while planning improvements for tomorrow's service. But tonight felt different, marked by the knowledge that their story had reached a place of resolution that honored both the struggles that had brought them together and the aspirations that kept them working toward even greater excellence. As Clara locked the restaurant's door and walked toward the bus stop where she now caught rides home to the comfortable apartment her management salary made possible, she carried with her not just satisfaction at another successful day, but gratitude for the journey that had led from unemployment and uncertainty to professional fulfillment and personal vindication. The city lights reflected her own sense of illumination, not the harsh fluorescence of efficiency without purpose, but the warm glow that came from work that mattered, recognition that was earned, and relationships built on mutual respect rather than corporate hierarchy. Chicago embraced her with the same welcoming spirit that she brought to every customer interaction, every staff conversation, every decision that balanced business necessity with human dignity. And you, have you ever been told you don't belong? Have you ever felt invisible despite your heart and sweat? Share your story below, because every voice matters, and every person who serves others with dignity deserves to be seen and valued. If this story touched something inside you, leave a like and subscribe. Let it reach those who need to hear it most, those waiting to be recognized for the excellence they bring to work that others might dismiss as simply service jobs. For more stories of quiet strength, unexpected redemption, and the triumph of human dignity over corporate indifference, click the podcast link on the left. Thank you for sharing this journey with us, for understanding that every person who serves others with care and competence deserves respect and opportunity. Until next time, keep holding on to your dreams and your dignity. They're the foundation of everything that truly matters, and they're closer to recognition than you might dare to believe.